It's Monday, the 13th of November, the start to a busy week of politics, eco data, and earnings. The countdown to the close starts right now.
The countdown is on in Europe. This is Bloomberg Markets European Close with Guy Johnson and Alex Steele.
It's 30 minutes until cash trading ends for this European market. Surprising strength from cable. Will it last as we have CPI for the UK coming in the middle of the week? We're at 122 on sterling versus the dollar. A lot of that is about the dollar side.